Thanks for joining us today for BRMC's Healthy Connections with our host Jodi Owens from the Reppell Diabetes Learning Center. Jodi, welcome. We're so glad you're here to join us today.
Well, thanks for having me, and we're just excited to get the word out and let folks know what's going on over at the Reppell Center.
I know you said you had a class today. What were you teaching?
Sure. I've got lots of classes going on all the time, every week. We teach some self-management classes for folks with the diagnosis of diabetes. Myself and Jan Halligan, our registered dietitian.
Oh, that's exciting to have her working.
Yes, she is. We are so excited to have her full-time now, which is something new for 2012 for us, and it's just been wonderful having her there and having her nutrition and her food knowledge and most of all her good sense of humor about everything. That's the best part. But it's such an important part of everybody's day-to-day. You know, food is so important, and it's such a big part of our day-to-day. So she serves a great purpose in helping us kind of enjoy our food, but also be very mindful of what we're putting into our system. But yeah, we've got classes going on all the time, and we also have different support groups and things going on over at the center. We have a pre-diabetes class that Jan helps teach and taking a look at foods. And for those folks that may not have diabetes but may be concerned or may have a family history of diabetes and their doctor says...
And they want to learn how to
Exactly. You know, you may
correctly.
be in that little bit of a gray area where we want to get you steered back in the right direction and everything before that diagnosis actually happens. So
it's I had it explained to me one time that it was sort of like a three-legged stool if you have diabetes, and it's education, and it's your nutrition, making sure that you're eating correctly, and then of course your medication. It goes. You've got to have that balance, that stool's going to fall right over.
There's a huge balance, and I'll add a fourth leg to your stool, if you will, on the activity level. And people always ask me, you know, what's something good to do if I do have a high blood sugar, or what am I supposed to do with that? And a lot of times it is, you know, you can simply go for a walk after dinner, or
walk it down,
get some activity in, and that helps so much. So it is. It's a tough balancing act for a lot of us, and I know trying to fit all of those things into day-to-day living can be a bit of a challenge for some people. But we don't, you know, we see this oftentimes said, you know, people are suffering from diabetes. But we try to take a different approach. We try to say that people are managing their diabetes. And management is such a huge part of it, because I don't live with you day to day. You know, if you have a meal plan or a dietitian on your team, maybe Jan or somebody else, they're not going to be policing your foods every day. It's really about the patient. And that's what we want to focus on and help them.
It's really
with their day-to-day.
All up to you.
It is.
On how your diabetes affects you.
Sure. And what you put in and what you put out, you know, the old in versus out is a huge concept, but it's also something that's quite difficult sometimes to get a good balance of. And then you throw in a couple of other things going on with your health, and you really do have some challenges in your day-to-day. So that's what we try to bring a little of that back down to the manageable level.
You mentioned earlier, too, that when you have these classes, oftentimes the spouse attends as well, so that they can help with that balance, because it's a family thing.
It's a partnership a lot of times between, especially spouse or someone that's living in the same home, and then also the family. If there are children or other folks involved, it's very hard to not. I think for me and having diabetes in my family, it's hard for us not to play the diabetes police. And I say that with a laugh and a smile, because there's so many of us out there that want to provide that little tip that we heard down the street, or maybe something that we saw on television. But really and truly, we try to help that support person be just that, be that support person, be that sounding board maybe for the person with diabetes. Because, and I tell the ladies most oftentimes that are spouses to our gentlemen in the class, and I say, you know, I understand you're probably the cook, and you're probably the shopper. And so you're going to play a big role in this as well. And we bring them into that.
Right.
I think it's very important. And sometimes we have a little fun. Sometimes we have a little rivalry even. So it's pretty interesting. You just never know.
I know you have a wonderful time. And you give great classes. So.
We do have a good time, and we try to kind of get rid of some of the myths and just some of the floating things that are out there on the internet and on the television.
What are some of the myths that you can dispel for our listeners and those that are viewing today?
I think one of the biggest things is it's all your fault that you have diabetes, and you've done this to yourself, or you're unhealthy, or you've lived this terrible, unhealthy life, and that's not the case at all. There's two sides to the coin. Especially, with people that come from a background with that family history of diabetes. It's very much oftentimes a genetic link,
right?
Whether it's type 1 or type 2, we now see that both, and it's not. It has absolutely, nothing to do with the fact that you've done something bad. There are lots of changes that happen, especially with type 2 diabetes, which is so common. About 85% of our diabetic population, if you will, has type 2.
Type 2.
And that always gets such negative press, and there's always so much negativity surrounding that. But what people don't realize is there's also some genetic implications in there, and just the fact that it is controllable, and yeah, I don't know any of us that are perfect, and you can overcome and live a healthy lifestyle and be able to manage it.
I'm always fascinated by when I've spent time over at the Reppell Diabetes Learning Center and looking through some of the literature and the cookbooks and the recipes that are there. These are not foods that are unusual or in any way like as though you're sacrificing. It's food that all of us really should be eating, whether we have diabetes or not. It's foods that are good for us.
Right.
In portion control, as Jan would say if she were sitting right here.
Yes, and I think that oftentimes gets a big limelight, if you will, too. But it's also about the healthy mix, and there are some things that we literally can get so many portions of, and be able to. I always tell folks, you get to manipulate your plate. Manipulate your plate. And that's really what it's all about. And I think Jan does a really good job. We don't teach folks to shop in the diabetic section or to buy everything sugar-free, because that's just not reasonable. It's
just not reasonable and not necessary.
No, and there's no science that says you have diabetes and you have to eat diabetic foods, because it is
a lot of vegetables.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of color, as Jan would say.
Absolutely.
When Jan Halligan, a registered nutritionist, has been on the show before, one of the first things that she normally does is bring her own plate. And it's smaller than any plate I've got at home.
Sure.
Most of us have this tendency to supersize everything, including our plates.
Right.
And here you go. And it's like, well, you're too young to remember, but I was always taught to clear your plate.
Oh,
you got to clean your plate.
Oh, I grew up in a cafe, and we had the restaurant, and it was we didn't waste a thing. Because that was our livelihood, and food was our everyday way to make a living.
Sure.
And so we learned that, and I learned that very young, that we didn't waste any of the leftovers or anything. That was always a big thing.
So if that plate is too big and too full and you eat it.
Sure. And I think that's something else that I share with folks a lot of times is growing up I had food at my disposal. And I struggled with weight and with different things when I was younger because of that. Because it was always around, and it was always just kind of there, and I think we oftentimes have I call it grazing, have a tendency to do that when the food is out and about and in our face.
It looks, smells, and it will taste so good.
And that plate method, and looking at the smaller plate and utilizing, and I call it my Jethro bowl at my house. And if you remember the hillbillies, Jethro tended to have a large portion, and that's what we've kind of moved toward as a society. The other thing I think that a lot of folks struggle with is the activity level, because we have so many conveniences these days, and there's so many more things that make life so much easier and so much more enjoyable for us, but that also take away from our activity and our actually get up and go, if you will, on the everyday, day-to-day. And no, I'm not telling anybody to go get rid of their riding lawnmower, but it does change, and it does manipulate the way that our bodies work. So,
well, I want to hear a lot more about this. We have to take a short break. We'll be right back. Don't go away, because I know that there's some exciting news. We're going to get back to that spotlight on diabetes we need to talk about during the next portion of our show, so we'll be right back.